Hey there, welcome to episode 416 of the Find Your Food Voice podcast. I am Julie Duffy Dillon, registered dietitian and your host. Welcome to the podcast where we help you find ways to move away from diets and continue to recover from your eating disorder. Today's episode is with Becca King. Becca King is the ADHD nutritionist over on Instagram, and she just published a book about non-diet ways to eat with ADHD. So I invited her on again. She was actually on the podcast back in 2022. And this episode in particular, we are putting together ADHD and PCOS because they go together so frequently. And this episode ended up being a really, really great episode, in my opinion. Selfishly, I loved it because I always learn so much from Becca. And we talked a lot about different types of eating styles that the two of us see with PCOS and ADHD. And we talk about these different styles and ways that you can specifically, if you identify as one of these eating styles, ways to intervene in a non-diet way. In particular, we also talk about selective eating with ADHD and PCOS. And I mentioned in the episode that I have worked with a lot of clients who have PCOS and also have this very kind of selective eating. Sometimes people will commonly call this picky eating. And I don't know, there's something different about than just picky eating. There's also a layer of anxiety that I see with this. So we talk a lot about that experience, but because it's something we both have seen a lot of with clients. We're of course going to talk about throughout the whole episode how intuitive eating looks different with ADHD and PCOS. You can still do intuitive eating. Yes, you can find ways to rely on your body with these two conditions. And it's just going to look different. That's all. There's going to be ways that you can still reject diets. We're also going to talk about some different types of hungers and reasons for eating that Becca has identified that are unique to ADHDers. So I'm excited for you to catch that one. So before I get to my interview with Becca, just a few announcements. This is the summertime, of course, when I'm recording these episodes. I actually just dropped my kids off at camp. So it is full on summer. And during the summer, my availability is different. Plus it's summer. It's time to slow down. So my team and I are just recording every 2 weeks. So after this episode, we'll have another episode in 2 weeks. It's actually going to be a group chat episode with Rachel and Colleen, and we're going to be talking about body changes in relationship. And then we'll probably do group chat episodes and then interviews every other week and just kind of see how that goes. So, come along for this ride. But I'm also spending a lot of time with my newsletter. So if you've been a part of my community for a while, you're probably already on my email list. If you are not, you definitely want to join now because basically what I am wanting to do is write more. After publishing the Find Your Food Voice book back in March, I want to keep writing. I want to write another book, but there's a little bit of time between. And so the email newsletter is how I'm continuing to write the Find Your Food Voice book. There's so many things that didn't make the book or parts of it that I want to continue to dive deeper into. So join me there. You can get to it over my website, julieduffydillon.com. You can also get it on Substack because that's where I host it, and it's findyourfoodvoice.substack.com. And there I do live videos, I do essays, and it's been a lot of fun. And I'm excited to bring you more just ways to reject diets, especially if you're living with a chronic condition and you're wanting to find ways to continue to promote health without dieting. I would love to be the one to help you out. So with that all being said, we're going to take a very quick sponsor break, and then you will get to hear my interview with Becca King. Hey, Becca, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Julie, thanks for having me.
I am excited to have you on again. So
Yes.
I don't know if the listeners remember, but back in, I think, 2022, right before I was pushed off Instagram because it was hacked, when I still saw you on my Instagram feed, you were on the podcast and answered a letter from someone who had ADHD and I think was maybe binge eating too. So since I haven't had you on my radar because I'm not on Instagram anymore, I saw that you published a book on ADHD and I was like, oh my gosh, we have to chat again.
Yes. And I was so excited when you reached out. I was like, yay, it's been a while. I can't wait to chat. So.
I know. Well, and so for you listener, what we're going to try to attempt is combining the ADHD PCOS experience. And if you have PCOS and don't have ADHD, I think you'll still get something out of it. I was thinking that a lot when I was reading your book. But also, if you have ADHD, I think you'll also get something out of it, even if you don't have PCOS.
Yeah.
So let's start there. And something actually I want to start with that kind of is like more personal for you. I'm curious about this book. Like, what was it like for you to write a book? Like, did you enjoy the experience? Did you not enjoy it? I don't know.
I think I enjoyed it because I was like, I would probably still do this again, maybe just slightly like differently now that I know like what to expect. I think next time I would probably like find a way to like have just very dedicated time and probably maybe even not be at my house to write it.
It's distracting. Home is distracting. Yeah.
It is very distracting. But yeah, it kind of reminded me of like, I wrote a thesis in grad school. So it kind of reminded me of like those intense writing periods of time when I would sit and work on my thesis. So I think that helped a little bit to prepare me for it. But yeah, a lot of juggling that and seeing clients was a lot.
I bet that was really hard to do. Yeah. Well, you basically wrote a dissertation instead of a thesis with this book. So like, well done. I loved it. And we'll talk more about it as we go through this. But like I told you before we pushed record, I was reading through this book, there were so many parts of it that my clients with ADHD and PCOS definitely will love it, because it gets like right into like how to work with your body and apply intuitive eating concepts with ADHD. But like, so yeah, obviously people who have been diagnosed with ADHD are going to love it. But even if you haven't, like, I don't have ADHD, and I was like, oh, I'm going to use this idea. I really like this. So I just wanted to put that out there. Like, I thought that was really great. And something in particular that I found fascinating were the types of ADHD eaters that you describe in the book. Can we go through those? And I'm going to like pull them up so I can kind of use them as we're going through them. And there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Six of them.
Yes.
Yeah. I just found it like helpful to like kind of personify a little bit each like different types of eaters that I see a lot in my practice, and having it be a resource of like, if these are things you struggle with, these are going to be the chapters in the book to like that are helpful to reference. But it was something for me in my own eating disorder experience, like kind of separating, like that was something my therapist had kind of done with me, of like personifying my eating disorder a little bit to like separate myself from it. So I was like, oh, this would be helpful to just have as like an understanding of like, hey, these are kind of the things that I struggle with.
Yes. Okay. So let me just say, I love how you weaved in your story in this. Like, I think that was really great and well done, because like it there's something about it. It made it destigmatizing in itself, just like seeing someone else experiencing something similar. And the thing that is really great about your book is that it is very like user friendly in that way. And like the different types of eating styles, is that what you call them? No, ADHD eaters. Yeah. But yeah, because you're like, go to chapter 3 if you're a grazer, like this is where, go next. So it makes it really user friendly. You don't have to like start at page 1 and go all through the book,
And so, it's not just a recipe book. That's something else I've gotten a lot on social media, because it has a little recipe icon on it. So people are like, oh, it's a cookbook. And I'm like, it has a chapter, there's 40 recipes in it, but there's also 8 other chapters on lots of good stuff.
No, this has so much more meat to it. And the recipes are like a bonus to me. When I was looking through them, they're great. I mean, and I'm not someone who loves cooking, but like reading through it, I was like, oh, I want to make this. But let's start with the grazer. Can we go through that? Like, tell me about someone who identifies as a grazer.
So a grazer would be someone, I often find that these are like my clients who are, especially if they're diagnosed later in life, a lot of the women I work with, before they're diagnosed, they would probably describe themselves as like a grazer, someone who's basically kind of self-medicating with food. They're always someone who's snacking. And when I say self-medicating, they're eating for stimulation and giving their brain that dopamine that they need. So they're probably someone who's always kind of snacking. They might tell me that they don't know, like they're not like, never really feel hungry, but I always feel like I need to be eating to help myself finish this task, or I'm eating to procrastinate so that I can go do something. Like, it's more like you're probably eating to get your brain stimulation so you can start the task.
Yes.
So yeah, that would be someone who's a grazer. They might not necessarily binge eat. A lot of my clients do still binge eat, so they're kind of someone who's grazing, but also binge having, also having some binge eating episodes mixed in there too.
Yeah, and the way that I would see this with clients with PCOS too is sometimes my clients would be like eating through lunch, eating through snack time, and then they would just like eat something just to make the hunger go away enough so like their blood sugar didn't crash.
Yeah,
but they never got like full.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they're just kind of in that like in between zone of things. So they're not fully satiated.
Yeah, chronically dissatisfied.
Yeah. And especially if they're restricting, it's like, oh, I'm only letting myself have a little bit of this or a little bit of that, or only letting myself have the lowest calorie option or whatever of everything. And it's not really what I always want to be eating.
Yeah. And then feeling really awful when binge eating happens, but like, it's just because their body is like, I need a meal.
Yeah.
And then the binge restrict type of eater is probably the most common that I've seen.
Yep.
For you too?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Kind of that not eating enough during the day, whether that's inconsistent eating patterns or literally like I maybe eat breakfast and I don't eat again until like 4 or 5 in the, in the afternoon, evening time. And then I call it the hunger monster that comes out. Like when you are just so ravenous because you haven't eaten. And for a lot of ADHDers, it's like your meds, wear off in that late afternoon, evening time. And you just get hit with this wall of hunger. And you're like, I'm ravenous. And what's the quickest, fastest thing I can get in my body right now?
Yes. Oh my gosh. The day that like where medications are not effing with appetite will be a really great day for, especially in my house with one of my kids on ADHD medication. And then we have the perfectionist.
Yeah.
I would bet a lot of people, no matter what type of eating that they're doing, there's some perfectionism in there. But what do you see with this type?
Yeah, I would say this is someone who maybe they feel like they need to get eating like perfect. And so they're someone who might kind of get sucked in, maybe like dieting or like healthy eating becomes like their hyper focus type of thing.
Yes.
And obviously that can become like a pathway towards disordered eating and or potentially an eating disorder. But they're probably someone who's like, I need to track everything. I need to, I need to meal prep and have all the, being overly perfect, probably potentially even burning themselves out on, I have a lot of clients who, if they do that, they might not have like the spoons or the executive function to do other things in their life because feeding themselves actually becomes like a full-time job. I definitely feel like when I was in grad school, that was it. That was how I was a little bit. Cause like, I'm going to be a dietitian, like I gotta be super healthy, and it was,
you're paying tuition for that hyperfixation.
Right. Yeah. Like, and you're like, oh, I have to be all into this. And it was like, looking back, I'm like, when I would get home from my internship, I would probably, spend over an hour every evening cooking dinner. And I'm like, I don't have the energy for that anymore. Like, that's not realistic for my life. I like look back, I'm like, how did I do that? And I'm like, oh, well, I also had a really messed up relationship with food. So it makes sense. I felt like I needed to do that. And now I'm like, I don't feel like I need to make every single thing from scratch. I'm gonna make my life easier.
I would appreciate that. Would be a really tough one to move away from. Like it would become so rigid. And also like self-identifying or like, that's just part of an identity at some point. Like you're
but it would backfire because then I would still end up binging. So, it'd be like, I'm eating perfectly. And then at some point it's like, I can't take it anymore. And I'm, binge eating and feeling bad about myself. So.
And thank God for binging. I always like, thank God those exist because otherwise the body just couldn't continue with that little amount. I loved reading about the next one, the Takeout King or Queen, which, I have teenagers at home. So like, this is something that is pretty common at my house. DoorDash instead of what are you making for dinner? I mean, that has come up many times. And I think about my clients that I used to work with in high school, college age. I mean, that was like, almost like a rite of passage, like relying on takeout food. And I would often try to tell the parents like, hey, this is an experimentation time. And let's figure out a way to like weave it in.
Yeah.
Yes. So what do you see
Yeah.
with this? Because I would imagine with ADHD, this is like has something to do more that it's not just like experimenting with different food. It's it's something else causing
like
it.
some of the executive functioning piece of the puzzle, like obviously ordering something on an app is a lot easier
Yes.
than planning out what we're going to have and then spending the time prepping it and all of that. And if you're just waiting until you're hungry to eat, a lot of times it's like, I can't cook a meal right now. I'm just going to, DoorDash some food, or I'm exhausted and I just, I got home from work and I don't have the capacity to make dinner. So I'm just going to order takeout, even though a lot of times my clients will share like eating takeout all the time. Like this doesn't make me feel good.
Yeah.
And so they're like, and so it can feel frustrating too, because it's like, I know this doesn't feel good for me, but I'm struggling to like, actually be able to follow through with like, I might buy the groceries to make the things, but then they go bad because I just don't get around to making them,
Yeah. People have told me they felt like so run down, like just they're probably not getting some micronutrients that's making them feel pretty awful. And something in the book that I like is like the section about like, getting back into the kitchen and like doing meal planning. And it's like anti-diet meal planning too.
Yeah.
Big win. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. I was like, I cannot tell people to meal plan in a very diety way because it's not going to work.
Absolutely not. And that's something that's really big for us on the show. The Rachel Popick, who's listening as my podcast assistant right now. Hey, Rachel. She's a chef and an anti-diet chef. And so we talk a lot about like anti-diet meal prep, like making sure you have enough food instead of like, let's make sure you don't eat too much, which I feel like is like the basis of meal prep.
Yeah. Everyone's like, if you do this, then you can control your eating. When it's like, this just means I can feel comfortable that like I have food in my fridge to eat off of throughout the week.
Yes. Like give your future self a high five and say like, here, I made it easy for you. And I would imagine many people listening, again, whether they have ADHD or not, would identify as a takeout queen or king. And is there something that you recommend to folks like that as like the first step to get away from that kind of style?
That's a good question. I think maybe finding a couple of things that are really, really low effort to make to start off, like, or thinking about things that maybe it's like, maybe it's literally like making some chicken tenders at home and like
some frozen chicken tenders.
Like,
I love that.
Like maybe like that in a salad kit and like, some microwave rice or like some potatoes or something. But like, I think easing yourself into it, and maybe it's like, I'm only going to make one meal a week. If you're eating like almost all your meals out, maybe it's like one meal a week I'm going to start with, instead of like, I'm going to be cooking dinner, like starting now I'm cooking from home and I'm not eating out.
I see the perfectionism.
Because that's super overwhelming. Like
that's too much.
Not going to work. And then you're going to feel bad because you bought all the groceries and didn't make anything. So like,
I see like the patterns, like I can even see like the binge restrict pattern in that kind of statement of like an all or nothing kind of experience, like getting all the groceries and then they go bad because it just was too much. And then the shame just floods in and
and then you're like, I'm never doing that again. So like, like, see, I can't do this. Or I can't be, like, feel like you can't be an adult. That's like something, or you're not like being an adult by feeding yourself the way other people do. That's part of what I hope people get out of the book, is that like, you don't have to feed yourself the way maybe everybody else does. And that doesn't make you any less of an adult or any less capable or whatever standards you're holding yourself to. It's not.
Yes. I'm like thinking about too, there's very few books that I've read that help people like learn some basic skills in the kitchen without it being either like too overwhelming, like using saffron and some kind of weird instrument, and then don't also start where people need to start. Like if someone's been relying on takeout food, fast food, or like just relying on that, to have an expectation to like make things from scratch is just too much, like you said, using like frozen foods or part of the meal, make it home. And I love that so much. And there was a book that I remember using myself because I've never liked cooking ever. And when my first kid was born, my ex-husband was the one who like would be working and like he normally would cook, but then he would work late. So I had started needing to cook and I was like, crap. And now I need to figure this thing out. And I was already a dietitian. So it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
Ellen Satter has a book that's like Feeding Healthy Families or something. And the first 2/3 of the book talk about different things like eating competence for adults, basically.
Yeah.
But then the last third of it is like getting used to being in the kitchen, like going from like Takeout, Reliant to like eating. And she talked about like buy canned food, frozen food, make part of the meal takeout, part of it things from home. And I was like, this is exactly what I needed. And then eventually I like just started to like not have to rely on recipes. And like, I don't know, I got more like comfortable in the kitchen. And somebody else who's writing a book right now that I think also is going to talk about that. I need to find out when her book's coming out. It's Christina Johnson. She's also writing a book, which since you're on Instagram, you may know more about when it's coming out, but she talked about including that as well. So I'm so glad both of you are doing that. Like we needed like an updated version because Ellen Satter's book is at least 20 years old now. So yeah, if you listener are like needing practical ways to like get cooking, this is a great book, whether you're neurodivergent or not. Like, I think so many people will be able to benefit from this like avenue of helping. Anyway, so we were talking about the Takeout king and queen, but let's move to the selective eater.
Yes. So this would be probably what other people might label like picky eater, but but we try to not necessarily use that language because it just doesn't sound very great. So saying someone's a little bit more selective. So someone who probably has more sensory sensitivities, that tends to be common. I would imagine, we don't have a lot of research on it yet, but I have a feeling that like ARFID in folks with ADHD will become much like more prevalent the more that gets screened for. I think it's usually talked about more with autistic folks, but I see it a lot still with ADHDers of having just a lot of sensory issues or having really bad experiences with food and then developing a lot of aversions to things. So those would be folks who probably struggle with their intake or maybe get told they eat like a kid or, you know, they like a lot of beige and bland foods and those kind of things because they're safe foods for them. They might rely more on processed foods too. Because they're predictable and reliable.
So consistent.
Yeah. And like, I don't think some people understand that experience of like how it can be very dysregulating almost to like bite into fresh food and it not be what you expect it to be. And that's really hard. Like blueberries are a great example of that people often use of like, sometimes they're sweet, sometimes they're sour, sometimes they're mushy, sometimes they're firm. And like, I only eat frozen blueberries pretty much because I know they will be pretty much, they're pretty consistent. So it's like, it can be hard to feed yourself when that happens, obviously. Or you feel limited too. And there's a lot of shame that comes with that, usually from other people of like, whether it's parents pushing food onto kids or having that shame even into adulthood of like, I don't like to eat a lot of vegetables or, you know, whatever, and feeling a lot of guilt or shame.
Like you were saying earlier, like it's like a sign of being a grown-up when you eat your vegetables and that kind of BS. So something, I don't know if I've talked about it in a long time on this podcast, but something that I saw really frequently working with people with PCOS is this type of selective eating. And what I often saw it occurring with was really intense anxiety. And PCOS anxiety, in my experience, is like no other. It's like all the like tips and tricks that people talk about with anxiety, all the medications that help everybody else. They don't even
even touch it.
No, they don't even touch it. And this like selective eating, I see with it too. That along with like having like sleep anxiety, like having trouble falling asleep, and it kind of is the package that I saw. And it wasn't like the most common kind of occurrence of eating stuff with PCOS, but I definitely like it was this kind of package I would see together, you know. And so and what I found, like just like you said, I'm so glad that you like put it in writing. Like it's okay if you rely on these like frozen foods or these foods that are like bland to be predictable. And like there was so much by the time someone would see me, they had like so much shame because they were, you know, they were adults.
Yeah.
And people were like, why are you eating that? Or like, why are you just eating these foods? And there's no color on your plate. But
Yeah.
like they had gone through decades with so much anxiety that I don't think people would ever be able to just survive. So like,
Yeah.
if you need to eat chicken nuggets every day for lunch, this is great. Like,
Yeah. I'm
you're
like,
getting
you're
enough
eating lunch
nutrition. Yeah.
regularly.
Yeah.
We're not skipping lunch. Like,
Yeah. You're not
heck
skipping
yeah.
lunch. Let's take the W for this. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was really happy to see that. And I would be interested to see, yeah, like I think ARFID is just getting talked about more, period. Even the last year. So
yeah, I think like the last couple years I've finally started to see it get talked about more, and not just in a like, usually it's talked about with kids, and seeing it's nice to see it also getting talked about more with adults.
Yes.
They're like, oh, you just kind of like, it's kind of like with ADHD where they're like, you just grow out of it. And it's like, no, like, what other eating disorders do you just grow out of? Like, there's not,
it's a phase.
Like, that's not how this works.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Such ignorance.
Yeah. Like, clearly someone has not experienced an eating disorder who is writing these papers or giving this advice, because it's not.
Yeah. It's really sad how many people in power make really big decisions. If they don't understand something that they do, just label things like phases or something or like, out of or something.
Yeah, and it
just because they don't get it.
Yeah. And you're like, that doesn't help anyone.
No, not at all.
And I think sometimes I'm like, can you at least try and put yourself in their shoes? Like, that's where I feel like it's missing. Sometimes I'm like, just imagine being in their like scenario, not like just coming from your lived experience, because it's not going to be for them.
And you know, that's like a hill that I will die on is, until dietetics is more accessible, I will be fine with people working with like health coaches and stuff, because like there's so many people with like lived experience that will never be able to access the credentials as a dietitian, especially now that you have to get even like a master's degree. So like including people with lived experience who can help a person understand. I think that would help people understand ARFID more. So listener, if you
it's like everyone's allowed to have food preferences too. It's like, you know, like we all don't have to eat the same things. It's okay if you might have a very strong food preferences of things you really don't like or things you really like. And then there might be other people who are like, I'll eat anything, you know? And that's cool too. So.
And I think our world kind of like celebrating or like talking more about extroverts instead of introverts. I think that's how it is with like food too. If you're like super into like trying new foods and like don't care if the berry is sweet or tart or firm or mushy, you know, if you're like super into like trying new things, like that's considered like better. So I hate it.
It's like, you don't have to be. I want people to not hate food, but I want them, you know, like to feel like at least neutral with food. Like, it makes me sad when people like, if I could just take a pill and never eat, that makes me sad. I'm like, you know, you've had some really awful experiences with food, and you're possibly your body that make you feel that way. And that makes me really sad. I'm like, I hope you can at least get to a place where you're just neutral with food. You don't have to love it or be a foodie or anything like that, but I hope you can at least not feel like food is this big burden. You know,
the people that I think about who have this like selective eating with their PCOS and ADHD, they have so many like interesting experiences and ideas and like careers. So it's like it's just not in the food, you know.
It's not they have other things they're more interested in, and that's totally okay.
Right. Exactly. So interesting. So the intuitive eater.
Yes.
That's the last one.
Yes.
Let's talk about that one.
Kind of my like, you know, kind of my gateway into like what is intuitive eating.
I love the gateway. Let's go through that.
So like kind of being like, hey, this is what it can look like to have a healthy relationship with food as an ADHDer is kind of what I wanted to be the last ADHD eater. Like, this is what your relationship with food can look like or could look like. So,
well, what makes intuitive eating different with ADHD? Because that's something that I noticed with PCOS. Like, 20 years ago when I was like first starting to work with intuitive eating. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I need to make some tweaks here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what tweaks have you noticed that you need to make with ADHD? Or is it just like hitting things differently from a different angle?
Yeah, I would say a little bit like hitting it from a different angle, but also just kind of like, I think people think that intuitive eating is like purely just listening to my body. And
it's a misunderstanding. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of ADHDers, that's like, I really don't feel like I can listen to my body. Or that, their body's unreliable. So it's like, okay, we might need some more external things to maybe cue us to eat. And that doesn't mean that you're not eating intuitively. It's understanding kind of like, hey, my body isn't giving me reliable hunger cues because I'm medicated, or I get really hyper-focused and I lose track of time. So I need something to interrupt me and cue me to eat, or I will go, really long times without eating. So I think that can be something that might be a little tweak. Because I think in intuitive eating, it is like, oh, you don't have reliable hunger cues because you've been dieting and restricting.
Yeah.
And once you stop doing that, like your hunger cues will become more reliable. And for some ADHDers, that might not happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think knowing that like, hey, I might need these other ways to help cue myself to eat, and things like that can be one avenue of things. And I would add like in there, like, eating for stimulation. I kind of have added that as like an extra type of hunger, like how they talk about in the book, the different forms of hunger. I kind of made eating for stimulation its own type of hunger because it does feel like that for people with ADHD. It can kind of feel like emotional hunger, like eating for emotional reasons, but it's kind of serving a different function. So I wanted to kind of like highlight that. And I would say that is also another thing of like expanding the idea that it's okay to eat for emotional reasons, of like, it's okay to eat for stimulation. Should it be your only tool for stimulation? Yeah. Probably not.
Right.
But acknowledging that it can be a part of a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
Too. So
I love that. No, that and the Dopa menu. I was like,
yes. I can't say I did not come up with that. Eric Trivers and oh gosh, I can't think of her name.
It's okay.
But they came up with it. How to ADHD is her YouTube channel. Okay. But they both came up with it, and it just was like, I use it with my clients all the time.
Will you give a definition of it?
Yeah, it's basically like, imagine a menu. It's kind of a visual of all your tools for stimulation. So your appetizers would be like quick little things you could do so like before this call, let's say if I was like, oh, I really need a little bit of stimulation, it could be like making a cup of coffee or something like that. So like little boosts of dopamine. Your sides would be things like fidgets, things you can do alongside other activities. Your mains would be things that take up some time and energy, but are like fulfilling sources of dopamine. So for me, going for a walk would be an example of something like that. Then your desserts would be things that are like easy to overdo and probably not very fulfilling. So like scrolling social media would be a good example of that. Literally food for a lot of some of my clients, like that might be an area of putting it there of like, hey, I need to be aware that this isn't always the most useful tool for me to use. And then we have your specials, which would be things that would be like things you can't do all the time because they might require more money, time, like maybe going shopping or for me, going to a concert. Like if I could go to a concert every single day, I would be my brain would be so happy. But unfortunately, I can't do that.
Especially now. Now they're so expensive.
Yeah, they're so expensive. So I'm like, okay, that's that. And then there's one more category that was on the original one, but like late night snacks. And I put that as like things to help you unwind from stimulation of like, especially in the evening time. I think people with ADHD feel like, oh, I'm always needing stimulation, but actually there is a time when we might need to unwind, or kind of, especially in the evening, if you do want to go to bed, it's like actually trying to get our brains to wind down, which isn't always easy. Can be helpful too. So
what's the dopamine part of it?
Yeah. So our brains, in a very oversimplified way, our brains are basically just have a lower baseline of dopamine. So our brains,
ADHD.
So our brains are just always seeking stimulation, basically. So like that's why people fidget or doing those kind of behaviors is helping their brain regulate essentially.
Okay.
So.
I'm thinking about my folks with PCOS who also have that sleep anxiety. I'm like, oh, I wonder how that is
Ooh,
with the dopamine
yeah.
part of this conversation. If it is it like they're just plumb out of dopamine and they're just like
Yeah.
I don't know, or do they have too much? That's what I'm like, I don't really
Yeah.
understand the dopamine side of things, but I don't think I have to understand it to just know, like, it sounds like you all like in ADHD circles are talking about like this is something that's important to this experience.
Yeah. And kind of like figuring out, like for me, it can be very easy to spend way too much time on my phone. That's probably my like annoying
Yes.
thing that I'm like, this doesn't make me feel good. Like I will get done scrolling and I'm like, cool, what did I, like that really wasn't that fulfilling for me. So I think, that's a nice conversation to like expand, or like, encouraging for me is encouraging my clients, like making time to do things that make you feel like fulfilled and alive is really important for our brains, because it's basically like we're like an interest-based nervous system. So it's a little bit like we need these things, or we're going to seek it out from other things if we're not making time for it. Like my clients, especially who are like, work is where I put all of my energy. A lot of times then they're like, they still need to have something else that stimulates their brain, or else they're kind of coming home from work and it's usually that they're just turning to food. And so it's like, hey, we need to have some other things that kind of fill up your cup a little bit. Because food maybe was serving that purpose for a while, and now it's to a place where you're like, this doesn't feel so good.
Oh, that's so interesting. I'm like downloading all this for my family life with people in my life. I'm like, oh, this is so interesting. Good. So one thing I wanted to talk about before we wrap up, because we're running out of time, of course, but you mentioned practical hunger, and I love how you phrased that, because I think it's something, especially as dietitians working in the non-diet space, we definitely like see like just hunger and fullness as like your markers to eat. It's gonna everybody's gonna have problems with that, and if you're on medication, that impacts it. If the hyperfixations are like also distracting a person from being able to connect what they need, like it's like a self-care thing. And so tell the audience what practical hunger is, and
so
what
like,
you're hoping people do with that.
It's eating when you're not hungry, but like kind of logically knowing that like you need to eat. I will get, when I first started talking about intuitive eating for ADHD on social media, people will be like, well, if I just didn't eat, if I just listened to my body, I wouldn't eat all day and then I would binge at night. And I'm like, but how does that make you feel? And they're like, that doesn't feel good. And I'm like, okay, yeah. So like logically, you might not be hungry for lunch, but like if that's your eating pattern and you don't want to be doing that, then we might need to, then eating lunch would be helpful for you. Or if we're noticing like, hey, I'm getting a really big dip in energy later on in the day and I'm not eating earlier, maybe I need to incorporate it. So for me, this was what made intuitive eating, when I started intuitive eating, feel doable, because I'm like, I'm on meds that suppress my appetite. So how am I supposed to eat when I'm hungry? And so for me, it is what helped me kind of make that like framework of like, okay, even if I'm not hungry, I'm going to eat every 3 to 4 hours, or about that, I'm trying to get myself on a more regular eating schedule.
But
just
see what happens. Collect your data and see what happens.
So I think it can help, especially like depending on your job, even like if you have a lunch break and that's the only time you get to eat at work, like you might not be hungry, but you're probably going to eat. Or it might be smart to eat, so that way when you get off work, you're not ravenous or feel terrible because you're so hungry. So I think, it's just a nice, like giving yourself permission to recognize like when you might need to eat from a place of self-care rather than like, my body is saying I'm hungry right now. And it's like, sometimes it's not, but I might know that this is my opportunity. Like if I'm about to hyper focus, or like I know I'm about to sit down at my computer and not get up for a while, I will probably eat a snack beforehand, even if I've eaten recently, just because I'm like, you know what, if I'm about to sit down, like when I was writing my book, I'm going to sit down and have a snack before I sit down at this computer and and not get up for hours.
Because once the flow starts, it's just going to start.
I'm not going to get up. So it's like, even if I might be hungry, so it's like, cool, I'm just going to eat before then, you know, knowing that way when I finally hit a stopping point, I'm not like, oh my gosh, I'm so hungry, like, you know, or I've got a headache because I'm hungry, or I'm not, like, you know, you hit that wall and you're like, that's so kind of trying to avoid some of that extreme hunger.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you spent time going through this side of like this practical hunger and using it as like, this is another part of intuitive eating, or like using non-diet techniques, because I think there's something about like how the world has taught us about intuitive eating, you know, like it just kind of through that dieting lens, because that's all, especially those of us who've been brought up around it our whole life. Like it's something that like the only way we can kind of see food recommendations. And just like to me, I'm like, it's like self-care, and like thinking about if you had a guest at your house and you know, you would want to make sure they ate, or they had the option to eat every like 3 or 4 hours, you know, like you'd ask them like, hey, you want anything to eat? Are you hungry? You know? So having that, I think is, I don't know, there's something about putting it in print and having permission just from that, I think is going to be really, really helpful.
Yeah. And it's nice to have some, like I have some examples in there. So it's just like, okay, let me be reminded that this is, because I think it does get oversimplified to like, it's just eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. And I'm always like, there's so much more nuance to it than that when it comes to intuitive eating. Because like a lot of times that's what people think it is. So like reminding them that there's a lot of gray in there, and you know, and that's what's different than, I would say a lot of diets are kind of still telling you eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full in some kind of way.
Exactly. But then just never trusting. I think that's the big thing with most diets. They're like, but you're probably eating too much. So
but like if you listen to your body, it's like it's still like, I had a conversation with a friend. She was like, I need to start like taking pictures of my food. So I think I'm just eating too much. And I was like, that's interesting. I was like, I don't have any idea. Like she was like, I think I'm doing too much. And I was like, I was like, I have no idea how, like, couldn't tell you how many calories I eat every day. And I have no desire anymore to really like need to know that information on a day-to-day basis. And I was like, that's interesting. Like, you know?
That you've been led to believe that obviously there's a problem if you don't know. And I think especially as dietitians, it's hard to not know. Like we have to actively prepare. Yes.
It's there in the like, you know, it's there, but it's thankfully now it's not the first, like I don't look at food as numbers.
You have to actively go back in the file to get to it.
I couldn't work in certain settings anymore because that's not how my brain, I mean, I could get there again, but like my brain just doesn't, that's not what I'm computing when I'm looking at food anymore.
It takes a lot of work as a dietitian to get to that place of like of doing that. So I don't know, I just say that for any dietitian listening, take care of yourself. It's a hard job. Taking care of yourself with food, and then taking care of other people in your life and helping clients with their food. It's just a lot. So we need to wrap up, but is there anything else or anything that you wish that people with ADHD knew about their relationship with food? Like anything that you want them to like have as though like their take home message?
Ooh. Usually what I like to tell people is that there's no one right way to feeding yourself. And like, that's kind of how I explain intuitive eating to people. I'm like, it's removing the shoulds and figuring out what works best for you. Like that's usually what I tell people if they're like not very familiar with intuitive eating. That's kind of how I'll explain it.
That's such a great explanation. Love that.
Yeah. Cause that way it's not like, seems like this woo-woo-y thing. Like when I first discovered intuitive eating, I did think it was woo-woo. And now I'm like, I don't feel that way anymore, but explaining it that way, people are like, oh, okay. And so I think just thinking about it that way, and I would say with ADHD in general, that like probably the things that are going to work for you are what is like, doesn't work for other people. And that's totally okay. That doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It just means you're doing what works best for you. And that's all right.
Yeah. Yeah. And anybody who has ADHD and PCOS or one or the other or both, like you
Yeah.
can also recover from your eating disorder. You
Yes.
can also not diet. Like you just
Yeah.
it may just look different, like you
Yeah.
said. That's all.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
okay. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Like the rest of the intuitive eating conversation will eventually catch up
yep.
and include it. But for now, you just may do it differently. And
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad that your book is here to help
Yes.
people to be able to connect with it. And your book, I'm going to say the name, How to Eat Well for Adults with ADHD.
Yeah.
And where can people find you if they want to know more about you or just
Yeah.
join your
Instagram
universe?
would be the best place to find me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at ADHD.nutritionist. That's probably, that's where I'm most active. There is where you can find me. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time and thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Julie.
So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Becca King, and I definitely recommend her book. You can get a link to it below and get right to my bookshop store where you can get to all other non-diet books I recommend, including Becca's. So thank you so much for listening and supporting the Find Your Food Voice podcast and newsletter. Remember to follow us over on Substack, and we are just so grateful that you're a part of the conversation and the movement. We look forward to bringing you the next episode where we're going to be talking about body changes in relationship. And that is a group chat episode with Rachel and Colleen. So I'm very much looking forward to it. And that is all for today. So I look forward to seeing you then. Bye for now.